Budget workshop to order at 5 p.m. Thank you all for coming out and being here with us today as we review our proposed budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. Thank you to City Manager, Finance Director, other staff, all employees that made contribution in putting together this budget for us for review. As we go through today's session, would like to say that we will review page by page, so not necessarily line item by line item, since all of us have already been reviewed line item by line item, or as detailed as you want it to be. So we'll go page by page, and if you have any questions, then ask those questions as we're on that page. We'll take a few moments. If there are no questions, then we'll go to the next page. We will allow public questioning at the end once the commission gets through with all of their questions. So public, you will be able to ask questions at the end of this once we, as the commission, go through all of the questions. So again, we'll go through page by page. If there are no questions, then we'll turn on to the next page, and we'll ask that City Manager or Finance Director just highlight any significant changes that we need to be aware of as we're going through the budget. So this time we'll turn over to the City Manager for any comments.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have our budget, our proposed budget today. We have met with each commissioner. It is online as well. And this is where we go through and talk about, where things are, why we put things in the budget. You'll see a theme that runs through the budget. A lot is as we grow and we continue to give good services to our city, then we have to add some personnel in some places, and you'll see that as a theme. I think that the city itself has been very frugal in the expenditure monies and funds. We have looked at some areas that we've probably cut a little bit, but I think the majority of each and every department has done very well in making those services be to the very best with the budget we have. One thing that we're really happy about is that we will not be increasing ad valorem at this point. From what we can see here, we will actually be decreasing ad valorem. And that's, we're very happy to be able to do that. It's been a lot of hard work, meeting with each department head several times. We started this process probably in February or March to get to this point, because our goal is to give you the best budget for the city we can definitely give you. And so it takes a lot of time, takes lots of running the numbers. Thank Kiki and the finance department for just working very diligently, working with the department heads, and trying to be as accurate as possible. We know no one is perfect. You may find something in there that we didn't see after we've looked at this probably 100 times, but we appreciate everything any feedback that you give us, and we will surely try to do better in the coming years. So I'm going to turn it over to Kiki.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening. Thank you for having me to discuss the fiscal 24 city budget. I will give you some brief highlights. Vicki hit on a few of them. I see a lot of really positive trends in this document, not the least of which is attributed to the growth of the city, the new facilities that are coming online. You will see some added staff members that are required for the additional services that we're going to be offering the residents, and for the new buildings as well. The payroll will be going up for the reason that we're adding staff, and we're also enhancing benefits for the staff, which I'll discuss a little bit later on, and will be coming to you for a vote next week in the form of an ordinance. One of the larger highlights that I know the residents are very anxious to hear, at the end of fiscal 24, the city total debt will be just over $43 million. When I first arrived on the scene here, we were close to 60. So through your leadership, we were able to identify funds through the surtax money and through the ARPA funds to buy down some of that debt. And at the end of this fiscal year, we will be closer to 43 million. So that's that. Dawn is helping me here so that I can focus on what I'm telling you, and she's going to help move the presentation along. The city debt begins on page 10 and calls out every payment that is made on each date for which bond payable or note payable. Page 12 tells you exactly what we're going to pay on each of the individual either note or bond payable, and it will tell you exactly how much principal and interest is going to be paid during fiscal 24. The debt service totals $5.689 million. That's at the bottom of page 12. I guess I should put my glasses on. Page 13 is what we use to put into Munis so that we're doing our budgeting. This is the same $5.6 million. It's just the way that it's imported into the system so that we get it in properly. You will notice the highlight here is we have paid down the surtax bond, which is in Fund 301. And by paying that bond down over the last few years, we've saved the surtax money about $500,000 in interest. We were able to identify ARPA money to pay off the 2014 capital improvement bond. You'll see that in the 402 section. There it is. You see that big blank spot right there under Principal 14 capital improvement bond?
Yes.
That is paid off. So that has saved the sewer department $500,000 in interest. So congratulations to the city. We are headed in the right direction. Page 14 is the page that I always tell you will give you the most amount of information in one area. This will tell you exactly how much each of the funds, the budget is. The city budget totals $60 million. That's the last number in the green column versus last year, $79 million. Where of the $63 million we're going to spend in 2024, $11 million comes from grant funding. The reason this is substantially dropped is because the Hurricane Michael rebuild is coming to a close, and we're saving quite a bit of money from the disaster fund. So that's the reason the budget has dropped so dramatically overall. Page 15 begins the revenue summary. The last time I came to you, I told you that the state had not published their revenue numbers. They finished putting those numbers up online on August 11th. So I do have good state numbers now. Ben Jenke mentioned to you in the earlier meeting that we don't know about the county number yet. We'll have a better handle on the county number having to do with the CRA budgeting next Tuesday, so that's in flux still. But the state numbers are good, and each of these line items talks about specific revenues in the general fund and all of the enterprise funds as well. Would you like me to go through these individually, or?
No.
All right. So again, the revenues total out at the bottom of page 20. That's the $63,515,000. On page 21, you'll see some charts that tell you where the expenditures go. And fiscal years, fiscal 20, 21, 22, the budget for 23, because clearly we have not finished 23 yet, and then the proposed budget for 24. And that just gives you some charts to give you an idea. Page 22 are the revenues. Same sort of idea, comparisons between 20, 21, 22, 23's budget, and 24's budget. These numbers do not include the disaster relief These are enterprise and general fund and governmental fund numbers. Page 23. This is the summary of all personnel costs. One more, please. Nope, not that far. Back. Yeah, up. There we go. So if you can read that tiny type, it will tell you that we're going to spend $15 million on personnel costs. Again, we do have additional staff identified for the facilities maintenance department, for the sports and rec department, a receptionist / HR coordinator. So there are different folks around the city that will need to be hired for next year's budget. This calculates out to about a 7% increase, and that is attributed to the additional staff. There's also a component of the inflation adjustment that was given to the lowest paid employees in July of this year. We've spoken to you about that in the past. Vicki identified the scale of the employees to bring up the folks at the bottom end of the scale. They got the larger increases. As they made more money, they got a smaller increase. Managers, directors, assistant directors received no increase. That was the inflation adjustment that was done in July. So that's part of the increase here. Also, what will be on your packet that we'll be discussing in more detail tomorrow are 3 ordinances to the pension plans. They are identical ordinances, but we need one for each: police, fire, and general. We're proposing that in order to match adjacent municipalities, we change the vesting system. Currently, an employee needs to be employed by the city for 10 years, at which time they become 100% vested in the pension. As you might imagine, younger employees with limited job experience, that's way too far in advance for them. Newly hired folks aren't thinking 10 years down the road. We are, right this minute, Bay County is at 2.8% unemployment. It's an extraordinarily tight job market. This is one of the tools we propose to encourage new staff members, quality staff members, to be attracted to work for the city and stay to work for the city. A 2.8% unemployment rate is just amazing. 5.0 is considered full employment. So again, we're using this as one of the tools to encourage people to come work for the city. We're suggesting that at the end of 5 years of service, they vest at 50%, at the end of 6 years, 60%, at the end of 7 years, 70%, and so on. Again, with the idea to attract and maintain good quality employees. The other portion of these ordinances, again, 3 identical, is called a monthly supplement. We are proposing that when an employee terminates employment with the city at normal retirement, they are given $300 a month over and above the regular calculated pension to help with additional costs that the city takes care of while they're employed for us. It's kind of a bridge to help them make that adjustment into taking over all of their own expenses. And those ordinances will be in front of you next Wednesday for the first reading. Those are the highlights of the employment numbers. Pages 24 through 29 tell you exactly where we're adding positions, moving positions, redefining positions. And then we will end up with 203.5 full-time equivalents, your 5 commissioner positions, 4 crossing guards, and 8 splash pad attendants. That's where we will end at the end of the year. Page 30. These are the grants that I told you about. Of the $63 million budget, $11,846,000 will be paid by grants. And this page calls out exactly which department or governmental agency is paying the grant and for what project. Page 31 through 32 tells you we're going to spend $16,795,000 on capital outlay. Generally, that's things like sidewalks, vehicles, equipment, generators for lift stations. Of that 16 million, 11 million is being paid for by those grants. So basically, we're only spending $5 million of the city money on capital assets, and approximately $1 million of that is in the CRA. You'll see that's $905,000. Then we get into the individual department budgets, and I can just, yes, okay. So the first is the legislative department, which is this body here. There's a modest 6% increase. Oh, sorry. Missed one last thing on the payroll discussion. There is a 2% COLA that for the first time this year you are eligible for. So as of October 1st, all employees and commissioners will receive a 2% cost of living adjustment.
Before we move into the department budgets, are there any questions from the commission over what we've just discussed?
For the debt, when was the last time we took out any city debt?
Before I hired on. I've been here since January of 2020. So the last
one
debt,
was the
the last
disaster,
debt was the hurricane, the
was in
$31 million.
the disaster recovery
2019
bond.
for Hurricane Michael.
The disaster recovery, that's
Okay.
correct.
31 million.
And I know we don't plan on taking out any loans this year. For the future, the only thing I can think of is the sewer plant. When we get, I don't know how many years that'll be, but I'm sure that in a few years we're going to have to look at that. And the other thing I know we had discussed when we did the one-on-one is the half-cent surtax. That's supposed to be going away
It sunsets in 2027.
27? Okay. I think that's all I had.
It'll get voted again, though. It won't go away, will it? They'll vote it back in probably.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it'll have to be on a ballot, and we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah. It'll be on the ballot. You watch.
I'm going to write that down. Commissioner Perno.
Kreskin, amazing.
Any other
Kreskin.
questions? All right, if not, if we'll move to our department. Thank you.
All right, legislative, which is this body, there will be a slight 6% increase, again 2% of COLA for your compensation, and we've added some travel money to $2,300 in travel money should you decide that you need to go to conferences or whatnot. The next page is executive. This is page 34. This is Vicky's budget. The highlight here is the 2% increase also is applicable to Vicky and to CJ, and there is a very modest increase of $7,500 here. We did move we are including $35,000 for a lobbyist next year. It does show up in a different budget, however. It is no longer in this budget, and I'll point that out when we get there. Page 35, that's the finance department. That's my staff. There will be an increase of about $28,000 here. As you're well aware, I'll be leaving you in November, and we're hiring a deputy finance manager. We're recruiting now. So I anticipate some overlap, and that's the cause for the increase in the finance department. Planning. This is Amanda Richards' budget. This is on page 36. She has an extraordinarily modest $3,800 increase. Public Works, page 37. There does seem to be quite a decrease here. As you'll see that there are no salaries charged to Public Works any longer.
Right.
In the past, Bobby Baker, Chris Lightfoot, and Kay Carter were charged into this budget. It is my position that we want to accurately record the enterprise funds and that their salaries apply to running the utility departments. So I've taken their salaries out of this Public Works budget and moved them to water, sewer, sanitation, and stormwater. So it shows that there's a $373,000 savings. However, you'll see an increase in a different budget later on. Page 38 is the one and only general fund debt obligation. It is actually a portion of a bond that was split between general fund, sewer, and water. And this is only the general fund portion. Page 39, facilities maintenance. As I mentioned, we're adding staff here. We also have some increases for a vehicle and general operating, again, because we will have additional facilities that need to be maintained over the course of the year. Page 40 and 41 are administrative support. We do have one employee included in here. Lisa Sorrell has just been hired as the new contracts and budget and grants manager. She just started with us not so long ago. So that's the top portion of personnel services is for Lisa. The reason that this shows a dramatic reduction of $4 million is because in fiscal 23, we included the Rails for Trails money you see there. That project, I'm very happy to say, has a grand opening tomorrow. So we will have no money in the fiscal 24 budget, therefore a $4 million reduction. Page 42, information technology. Again, a small increase here. In fiscal 23, we hired, in the middle of the fiscal year, we hired our third person into the department. In fiscal 24, of course, we're budgeting for all three positions for the full year, so that accounts for the increase. Law enforcement starts on page 43 and continues to page 44. They do have an increase of $170,000 for personnel, primarily because in fiscal 23 they were not fully staffed. They had a number of positions that were vacant for a good portion of the year. We're not anticipating that to be the case in fiscal 24, so we're budgeting with all available positions. Fire department starts on page 45. Same explanation for their personnel. I think they were down 4 staff members for several months. Of course, we're budgeting all of those staff, and I believe that they are fully staffed today. So that will show the increase of $225,000.
Do have a question about law enforcement, and that's just how competitive are our salaries in comparison to other law enforcement agencies?
Well, I will tell you that again, through Vicky's leadership, we have done everything we can to raise lowest bottom salaries. And again, with trying to get competitive on the pension side, I really think we make these few adjustments, we're going to be right there with all the neighboring municipalities.
Okay, thank you.
Code enforcement is on page 47. Same explanation, we have 2 positions in code enforcement. Currently only one is filled, and I think we're recruiting for the second position, but that accounts for the difference between the 2 budgets. Protective inspections, this is Charles's budget. Same explanation, he hired his inspector halfway through fiscal 23. Of course, we're budgeting for a full year's worth of Joe's salary here. Human Resources is on page 49. You're going to see a very large increase in human resources. Through Vicky's direction, we include the insurance policy for the city in this budget. As you can see, we're going from $552,000 to $708,000. This is just one of those market pressures that we have no control over. We have to insure the city, we have to insure the buildings, we have to insure it against liability. I am confident that our broker is doing the best he can to get us the best deal we can, but this is the increase he had recommended when last we spoke a couple of weeks ago. And it clearly is significant. It's a $156,000 increase. Page 50, Lynn Haven Bayou Park and Preserve. This is fully grant funded. Well, we're going to spend $374,000 on the Bayou Park. We submit all of those monies through the Triumph Fund, which I'm sure you're all aware of from the oil spill in 2010. We were granted $3,500,000 for this project over a 10-year period. It's whichever comes first. So we're trying to spend about $350,000 a year so that we run out of money right in the time frame. And then in year 11, the Bayou Park and Preserve becomes the city's responsibility in total. Page 51, customer service. You've met Stephanie. She has a small increase here. Vicki has asked us to price out a kiosk in the new gymnasium. This is so that folks can pay their bills while they're visiting a sporting event there. And that should be installed in the coming weeks. Streets. Now, this is showing an increase. I had mentioned earlier that it was my goal to make sure that we were correctly recording all of the expenditures that have to do with the utilities. I'm told by Chris Lightfoot that the folks we had charged to streets and the folks that were charged to stormwater don't know the difference between each other. They basically do the same work. So it was determined that we'd take all of those folks and we would split their salaries 50-50 between streets and stormwater. So that's why you're actually going to see an increase in streets, but you'll see a savings later on in stormwater.
Good.
And that explains the difference there. Page 54 is fleet maintenance. A small budget savings here, just tightening up here and there, and no real capital outlay for them. Economic development. This is part of Ben Jenke's responsibility. As I've explained to you in the past, we take his salary and reportion it out between economic development and CRA. We've changed the proportion again. The money is not changing. We're just moving it from economic development into CRA because he is spending more of his time in the CRA. And the vulnerability assessment is included in this budget, as is the $35,000 for the lobbyist. That is included in this budget. Library, I've continued to keep it here in hopes that we'll be using it soon, but there's no money. Sports and recreation, we talked about additional staff members, and there is some equipment that we will need for the new sports complex, a field drag, and a topper. I'm not exactly sure.
Top pressure.
That's a better question for Vicki or Justin. The other thing to notice here is the Kane Griffin parking lot. We'll spend $350,000 of impact fees to make that a true parking lot to enhance Kane Griffin. Parks and Ground.
Sorry, and that'll be the parking lot for the property that we purchased near Kane Griffin.
Correct.
That's correct.
Parks and Grounds expenditures, same explanation about the salaries. We're hiring an assistant director to help Ty with his workload. And then there's some cost savings in the operating. Communications and marketing. They have a flat salary here. There's no real adjustment. You'll see some big blank columns there. We're changing our recording method, again, so that we can more readily identify how the money is being spent. As you'll see above, it says supplies, special events, $221,000 in fiscal '23. All the money that you see in the shaded column to the right of that is in replacement of that $221,000. So rolling forward, if you come to me or the finance department and ask, hey, how much did we spend on the Easter egg hunt? I just have to press in a couple of buttons and we'll be able to tell you that money instantly. So it's not new money, it's just reported differently. Animal control is on page 63. We do have a very slight savings in personnel here. We had a long-term employee who retired and was replaced by a newer employee. General fund impact fees is page 64. Again, I've told you a few times that the audit requirements have changed. In the past, this money was actually part of general fund. Now it needs its own fund. We will see that $350,000 that we're going to spend on the parking lot at King Griffin, and the rest of the money will be set aside for future use. CRA is next. Ben has already spoken to you about that. And again, I'll know better about the revenue side Tuesday evening. Water expenditures. Well, on water, it shows that we're going to have a $69,000 decrease on salaries. And I told you that we were parsing off the Bobby, Chris, Kay Carter, Danny, and Kathy are all going to be divided amongst the 4 utilities. The reason why you still see a budget savings here is in the past, Greg Killingsworth and his assistant were charged just to water. None of their, did I say Killingsworth?
Kidwell.
I'm sorry, that's a personal friend of mine. Greg Kidwell's and his assistant's salaries were charged exclusively to water while they were working in other utilities. I have no history of how that was determined to be done, but we're correcting that now. And that's why you see the large savings in water this year. Projects. The debt, of course, is a large portion of all of the utilities. There's $252,000 of debt service in the water department. The sewer department will show an increase in salaries. See my earlier conversation about how we're handling things in the future to more accurately reflect where those folks are working. Of course, the debt service for the sewer department is the most expensive of the utilities, but again, Vicki was able to identify paying off that 2014 capital improvement bond, which saved us over the life of the bond $500,000 in interest. The stormwater, one thing I will highlight here, I have included the recommendations for the water, sewer, and stormwater. They are going to be coming to you in the coming days to approve. If you do not approve the recommendations, I will have to revisit these budgets. So all recommendations for revenues are included in this document. And you will see that the stormwater ends on page 74. again, assumes that recommended assessment, we will be reducing the stormwater budget by $1.8 million. That's because we're finishing projects in '23 and not replacing them with the different projects in '24. Sanitation is also going down $1 million, primarily because we are no longer transferring between utilities. I had to transfer $1 million from the sanitation department to keep the sewer cash balance in a positive position earlier this year. I'm going to probably have to do that again before the end of the fiscal year. Won't be to this extent, but in fiscal '24, the goal is each of the utilities stands on its own 2 feet. No more transfers between the utilities, and I have never, and I know that Vicki has never transferred general fund money into the utilities or utility money into the general fund. It has not happened.
And it's my understanding we can't do that because that's against Florida statute, right?
I don't know if it's against Florida statute, but it's bad bookkeeping.
Okay. I thought there was something from the state that said you couldn't use general fund and enterprise.
If there is, I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
That would be a great question for Kevin. But I will tell you that the utilities are set up, the intent of having enterprise funds is that so they run like businesses.
Okay.
You bring in enough revenue to cover the cost of your expenditures. That's how an enterprise fund is structured.
But other cities do it all the time, so.
What's that?
I mean, other cities transfer it all the time, so we could do that if you wanted to.
General fund to enterprise?
Yeah. Is that what you want? Is that what you're proposing?
No.
Okay. Just checking.
I just thought, I could have sworn I saw something where the state says you can't do that, but maybe I'm wrong.
All right, page 76, these are the enterprise impact fees. Again, in the past, this money was reported in each of the utility accounts. So now they're in their own funds. We're going to be using $1 million of the sewer impact fees to do the design work for the sewer plant. That's a $2.5 million design project that will run the course of about 3 years. Then the stormwater will spend $352,000, and the rest will go into reserves for previous budget or coming budgets. Excuse me. The disaster recovery, Hurricane Michael, page 77. As I discussed with you in the very beginning of this presentation, this is the primary reason you see the city budget decrease so dramatically. In fiscal '24, we will be spending $6,121,000 versus in fiscal '23, we had budgeted $20,940,000. Again, most of the projects are terminating. We do have a few things still to accomplish, and they're reflected here. The largest portion of the disaster recovery fund is the debt service. And that's $2,700,000 a year, which will continue until 2033. So everybody is aware that that bond does have quite a lengthy life to it. Then the COVID expenditures, I was mentioning this at staff earlier. We do have a little bit of money left over from the county funding for COVID expenditures should it come up as an issue again. And then lastly, on page 79, this is the surtax money. This is what you were asking about, Commissioner. It does sunset in '27 unless something happens at the state level. And I know this is something that has to be voted on. So I don't know where it is at the state level. But we will be spending, we will spend some money on the senior center that has to do with the stormwater improvements and getting ready for the library to happen. There's street paving money in here. This is the 26th Street sidewalk, Commissioner, that you asked about earlier, and also 8th Street sidewalk as well. And then the debt service. Again, we've prepaid some of these bond monies. I've made 3 individual installments. That has also saved the city $500,000 on those bonds. And with that, I've concluded the budget.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission for our
I don't have
finance
any
director?
questions. I just got a comment that, what's the lady's name that's oversees animal control? Ramona?
Ramona.
If you look at her budget, a lot of that is because of what she does. I know she reaches out to vets, and she gets all kinds of donations, and she advocates for all that stuff. So I just want to say kudos to her for keeping her budget the way it is. She does a lot more than what she really is required to. So, and thank you to the finance department for
Thank you.
putting all this together and keeping us straight.
Commissioner Vandergriff, any questions?
Well, I don't have a question. I just kind of have a statement that I also want to thank the finance department. I don't know if the citizens realize it, but they do a tutorial with us. So if we don't have questions right now, it's because we bombarded them with questions during our tutorial. And so thank you for your patience.
My pleasure.
Commissioner Perno, do you have a statement?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for the one-on-one that we did have. That answered a lot of questions for me.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, at this time, we'll allot some time for the public to ask any questions. Any questions from the public? If you'll come to the microphone, please. Thank you.
I noticed, excuse me, Janet Walker, 1106 Michigan Avenue. I noticed in a number of departments that the utilities, it just says utilities. I have no idea what the utilities were, but they've gone up drastically. Is there a reason for that, or do I need to pull it page by page?
So utilities are going primarily up for 2 reasons. You've heard about FPL. Yes? Primarily utilities is electric. In a couple of buildings we have gas service, but it's minimal. It's for stoves and whatnot. So utilities primarily is FPL, and we're adding buildings. So the So the gymnasium, we're going to have to pay for 12 months worth of air conditioning at the, yes, and 12 months worth of air conditioning next door.
And
Go ahead with your question. Yeah.
on the library, my pages fell apart a second ago. On the library, here it is on page 77. It says capital outlay for the library buildings.
Oh, $1.5 million.
Yes.
Yes,
Is the library going to take place this year?
it is in the budget for this year.
Okay, that's a question, thank you. All right. And the senior center. The senior center is a nonprofit. How does that work with the bills that you're paying for them?
No, the building belongs to us. The senior
Correct.
group is the nonprofit. So this is the City of Lynn Havens building.
Right, but according to Sunbiz, the senior center is a nonprofit.
No, the senior center is not a nonprofit.
Senior activity.
The senior activity group is the nonprofit.
The group of people
Yes,
have an association
yes,
that is a nonprofit.
okay,
We lease this building, the city owns this building.
right,
We lease them this building for the grand total of $1 a year.
to them,
Yes.
That's what
Okay.
she's
And
just
they
telling
pay
her.
20 years in advance.
okay. Because according to Sunbiz here, it does say nonprofit.
Yes,
Yes.
again, it's association of people. Has
Okay.
nothing to do
People.
with the building.
Okay. Now, when it was first incorporated at the senior activity group,
Club group.
Michael White was the, yes, he was the,
Can I answer that? Yeah, and
please.
so Michael White is no longer
He
on
was the-
anything
right,
there.
He was the registered agent?
That's exactly
Will
right.
that be changed?
Yeah,
Will you
that
have a
is-
change in registered agent?
They have changed everything there. They have their own bylaws, their own board, everything. The seniors do.
Because as of now, it's still showing Michael White, so that
It shouldn't be.
it should be changed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions from the public regarding this year's? Yes.
For sports and recreation, it went by really quickly, so I couldn't see, but is there money for the 3 football fields to be completed this next year?
No, that is not in this budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the public? All right, thank you all for coming out tonight. Look forward to hopefully seeing you all tomorrow at 10 a.m. for our grand opening of our Rails to Trails. If you plan on coming out, please park at the Palo Alto Church of Christ on 231, and we'll shuttle you down to the grand opening. And have a good evening. Meeting adjourned.